he was like, initial reaction was, me? You want to write a book about me? But I told him, I didn't have to convince him much. I told him that it's really inspiring what he's done. It's a non-traditional route. And what became more newsworthy after the fact is now there are more and more people in MLB who went to NPB without any major league experience.
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first page.
Welcome back, Second Pagers. This is Beyond the First Page podcast with siblings Phoebe, Phil, and Isaac. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Phil.
I'm Isaac.
And this is a very special episode and club meeting outside of our normal published schedule. We are talking about Baseball Gaijin with the author, Aaron Fischman. Aaron, welcome to the podcast. And from all of us, thank you so much for being here. You are our first guest, first author, and we are just so honored to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to do it.
Yeah. So just as a reminder to all of our listeners, or if you're new here, please, if you like this podcast, follow us on Spotify, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us wherever you find your podcasts. And also we will be talking about major plot points and spoilers from throughout the book because this is a book club podcast. And so what we really recommend that you do is read Baseball Gaijin and then come on and listen to the episode. You will be very happy that you read it. I know that we are. So without further ado, we like to do an icebreaker to start off the podcast. And this is really apt with Aaron being on because we obviously want to, introduce our readers and listeners to Aaron. But we also want to take this opportunity. This is kind of weird, Aaron, to introduce ourselves a little bit because you and I met through a mutual friend. You haven't met Isaac or Phil before. And a lot of our listeners may not know, our backgrounds at all. Really just want to take a minute to introduce ourselves, where you're from, what you do. And if you wanted to also say, how you got into writing, that would be a great opportunity, Aaron. So I'll go first. I'm Phoebe, obviously. I live in Washington, D.C. now. I'm actually in the Air Force and I do HR. I also wanted to share too, we really started this podcast. We were just talking a little bit before starting recording and really started this to be able to connect more with my brothers. I know, Aaron, you have a twin brother, and I'm not sure if you have other siblings. So, and you two are obviously close. So, it was really important for me to talk with Isaac and Phil, and we love books. Our dad's a librarian, so that's kind of the brainchild behind the podcast. And so I'll kick it over to Phil to introduce himself a little bit.
Yeah, I'm Phil. I am currently a PhD econ at Vanderbilt. It's my first year. I just got married 2 months ago. I live in Nashville, right next to campus. And I'm the youngest of them. I think I probably read the most out of these guys, but I listen all audiobook, like literally have not read a physical book in years. I am an avid baseball fan, although unfortunately I'm a Yankees fan. They're down 2 right now, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Isaac.
I'm Isaac. I'm the older brother. For the true believers that have followed this podcast from the beginning, all like 3 of you, I was originally not part of the podcast to start with. And then I thought Phoebe and her husband had made this, not Phoebe and Phil siblings. And I found out, I'm like, what the heck, guys? Like why was I not asked to be in the sibling podcast? But happy to be here now. I live in Oklahoma City. I'm an Air Force pilot, so in the Air Force as well. I fly the AWACS at a Tinker Air Force Base. And then my wife is a doctor in Dallas. So sometimes you'll see my background is different. I'm not just switching rooms for the fun of it. I'm probably in Dallas.
Sounds good. So, as you mentioned, Phoebe, I have a twin brother, Joshua, also a huge sports fan. He's my only sibling. So naturally, we're really close, just being the same age. But having the same genes as identical twins, but also we don't have any other siblings. So we're close for that reason too. He works in sports PR right now, so similar field, and we're both big sorry Phil, Dodgers and Red Sox fans. Just because our dad is from,
Really
so that's
bad
double bad. Yeah. Our dad is from New Hampshire. So,
Although
and
the only two people to ever win from the Mookie Betts trade are you two. You got both sides of that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we like New England teams because he was 5 when he moved from New Hampshire, but he just always remained Celtics, Patriots, and Red Sox fans. But obviously, being born and raised in LA, we like the LA teams, not the Lakers though, because of his Celtics fandom. So I'm sure that Phil, you probably don't mind that we don't like the Lakers. I don't know.
I care on that one. Yeah.
So anyway, I started reading biographies, political and but mostly sports biographies when I would say early high school, maybe late middle school. So I really like to read. I also collected baseball and other sports cards, and was just really interested in statistics on the back of cards. And so I think I always had an analytical mind and just a intellectual curiosity for just getting more information, behind the scenes information, but also I just like to tell stories. And so even back then, I didn't have the skills or tools to be able to write a book like this, but I always knew that I wanted to do it. And so I'm excited that I finally got the opportunity.
Yeah, congratulations. It's a huge accomplishment. So
Thank you.
well, thank you, Aaron. Great to get to know you a little bit more. And we always do next the book in 60 seconds to give some people who may have not read the book or read it a little bit of time ago an opportunity to refresh themselves. So Isaac, would you give us A Baseball Gaijin by Aaron Fischman in 60 seconds?
For sure. So this book follows the professional journey of Tony Barnette, starting pitcher from Seattle, Washington, whose journey to the MLB is anything but traditional. By no means an exceptional talent, we learn of Tony's success and struggles, mainly focused on his time in the Nippon Professional Baseball, acronym MPB, league in Japan, in his fight to play in the MLB.
Awesome. Yeah. And so we talked about this a little bit, Aaron. Obviously, wanted to be prepared to talk to you as the author. And we really wanted to keep this still in a book club style. And so I think it's just such an awesome opportunity for us to talk about things that came up to us, but also then get, the author's perspective to really get the answers on a lot of our burning questions that we have. And so, yeah, I'm just so excited to talk to you. And the first thing that I think the three of us really were thinking about, and maybe, I guess you weren't thinking about it because you wrote the book, but something that really came up to us was, this idea of who deserves a biography. And then also, how do you, I guess, like what goes into a biography? Who is it for? And so I'll start it off because I think I probably have the least baseball knowledge. And I will say I'm not a huge baseball fan. I love going to games, but I think that's also why I loved your book, because you made this, and we really want to talk to you about this a little bit later on the podcast, but you made this very approachable for somebody who does not know very much about baseball. But from the biography perspective, this is the second biography we've read on the podcast. We read a book biography, a epic, just in length, I should say, not in actual goodness. Phil's shaking his head because he has so many thoughts and feelings. We read a biography about Vincent van Gogh earlier in the year, and this could not have been more different than your book. It was so long. It was so unapproachable. Van Gogh was so unlikable, as opposed to yours, where it was so approachable. It was the perfect capture of, Tony's career in baseball, his family. You get all that aspect. And I think that for me, a biography, and I was thinking about this a lot as I was reading it, is really so important that you get the family aspect, which I think you captured so well. That's really important to me. And I think maybe I'm not answering the question of who deserves a biography, but I'm really thinking about like, what do I get out of biography? And it's that relatability to the person. And I think that Tony Barnette, it was like the American dream for me. And in the title of the book, it's Chasing a Dream to Japan and Back. I have the book here. Thank you for this. It's awesome, by the way. So I think for me, the biography, the family aspect is one of the first things I really look for, that and the relationships between that person, the people in their lives. And I could say more, because I think also something that I really love was how well researched this book was and how many people you spoke with to talk about that. And that goes back in the relationship too. But I wanted, before you answer and kind of give us our answer to our burning question, I wanted Phil and Isaac to be able to weigh in on what they are looking for in a biography and who they think should have a biography, I guess. So Phil, I know you had some thoughts on this.
For me, I think people who have like influence on world events, that's a cool biography to read. But also, if done well enough, I mean, my 3 siblings we all just got married, and like all of us obviously love some ordinary person, not that like extraordinary, but like not famous and life-changing. So if you're able to fall in love with somebody, you should be able to read about somebody's life that's just sort of a normal person. So I think if done well, and I think that I would argue that Tony Barnette is, as far as professional sports players go, he's not setting records, and I think you were really upfront with that, Aaron, in the first chapter. To anybody who went into the book thinking this guy was the first guy to go to Japan and back, which I did, you gave a list of people who'd done this before. And that was, I think, really just like straightforward. Like, this is about something different than he was a trailblazer, but not the first one. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I think that was cool.
Yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to read about, something that is not known. And I think that's sort of where the idea of a biography or a lot of nonfiction, it's like informing the reader about something different. So yeah, like Phil said, obviously I'm not a huge baseball guy, but hadn't heard of Tony. Like probably a lot of people don't know about him. He's not, I think
a lot of baseball people don't even know him that well, honestly.
Yeah. And it's like, not like, even at the end, he didn't do anything heroic and win the World Series, have even a part in a World Series or anything. But just the thing I got the most out of it, and I think that it shows that this is a story worth telling, is just this blind ambition to achieve this thing, and like this unwillingness to not become a professional major league pitcher. These stats are being thrown out there in the minors, and it's like, in what world did this guy think that he had the ability to go do this? He's like getting rocked in minor league baseball, and he still has this dream of doing this. He did it, and it's like, holy shit, like you pulled it off somehow. So I thought that was really cool. And those are the kind of things, like if we were talking about the biography genre in general, that is like worth hearing about, and that the reader gets something from.
Yeah, Aaron. So I guess the thing is, and it's interesting to you mention you got interested in writing, potentially, it sounds like, through reading biographies. And so talking about, would love to hear your perspective on who you think deserves a biography, and then why you thought Tony Barnette did.
It was so fascinating what all of you were saying. And each of you touched on different things that I wanted to address. I think it's really cool. Just it was really kind, a lot of the feedback that you gave, because I'll start with Phebe. You saying that you're not a baseball fan at all, but that the story was approachable, I see as a big compliment, because that's what I was trying to do, to broaden the audience, because there are a lot of baseball fans out there, but I didn't want it to just be for a stereotypical nerdy fan. That's what the chapter endnotes are for. If you really want those really specific fun facts or extra stats and stuff, their chapter endnotes in there. They're not in the audiobook, but in the hardcover, and you can just skip those if you're not a big baseball fan. for instance. But I wanted to write a story that was relatable to non-baseball or non-sports fans as well. I think the inspirational aspect of it is one thing that people can either relate to or aspire to be like, where you just have
Yeah.
one singular goal, and no matter what the odds or the obstacles are that keep appearing again and again, you just keep going after that goal. And so I wanted to inspire people. I think Tony does that with his story, even though, as Phil noted, he wasn't the first to go to Japan and be able to return. So it's these themes, I think, that are really important and allow people to relate to it. But also, someone told me, and I really appreciated hearing this, that I did a good job of humanizing Tony Barnette. I think if you're just saying basically like a sequence of events and even describing them in detail without really hearing quotes from them and getting to know their family and what their innermost thoughts are, then you don't really feel like you're along for the ride, and it's hard to live vicariously through them and put yourself in that person's shoes. So I really tried to get a lot of that family life in there. I think also I owed it to Hillary and the interpreter Go Fujisawa and these people who were so instrumental in Tony's life and journey. I
Yeah.
owed it to them, I think, to make them central figures in the story, because Tony would readily admit that he would have failed and given up a long time ago before he achieved any of this if they weren't there for him. And they were so important in allowing him to achieve the success and supporting him along the journey so that he didn't give up when it was easy or convenient to. Also, one last thing on that note, initially I was probably too ambitious, and I didn't even really think of it as a biography of Tony Barnette. I kind of thought of it as like a biography of Tony Barnette and the teammates that he played with and the other Gaijin that he played
Yeah.
against, and just talking about different routes to the major leagues, or people who didn't end up getting to the major leagues. So I just wanted to entertain and inform, but it wasn't necessarily so strictly focused on Tony's story. But I was fortunate to have the access to him. His story, I think, was the most compelling. So I centered it around him, and then I just really enjoyed going into the backstories of all of the related characters.
I really think that too, and Isaac was saying about culture, and I think so not only their backstories, but then like I wrote down about the umbrellas, about the tsunami that happened throughout the story. I thought that like the bullet train, just hearing about Japanese culture and their culture around
Mhm.
baseball, that also bled through a lot for me. And again, as someone who's maybe not as interested in baseball, but can still get a lot out of
Yeah.
that book.
So it's not
And
just
I
play
think,
by play, it's other stuff that you're interested in culturally, right?
right. Yeah. And you did a fabulous job, I think, of exposing that.
Aaron, did you know Tony's story beforehand, or when you set out to write, it was kind of more you were going for more like the Japanese baseball culture and found out about him? Like what? How
Yeah.
did you end up on the subject matter that the book became?
Mhm.
It's a really interesting question, and I can give kind of a long winding answer, but to try to be succinct, I didn't know his story. It wasn't as fascinating when we first got in touch, and we kept in touch over the years as his story got progressively more interesting and newsworthy. So, to give you a little background, I went to college as an undergraduate in Northern California at UC Davis, and I was writing for this small independent sports website there, and just blindly reaching out to minor league pitchers at the AA level whose bios I knew nothing about at all, other than a couple statistics that they logged a lot of innings and that they had good K to walk ratios. They struck out a lot of batters, didn't walk as many batters. So it was like a little bit that I think I was trying to, in a really imprecise way, guess who might be in the majors someday. But it also, if you think about it, didn't necessarily make sense because Tony was already something like 24 years old in AA, which is kind of old, actually.
Yeah.
Um, to be at that level in the minors, because he played 4 years in college and then was every year was basically rising a level. He wasn't accelerated up the organization like some of these prospects who have multi-million-dollar bonuses. So anyway, long story short, medium, he agreed to do an interview. None of the other 5 or 6 people did. So that started it. He said yes. This was the really early days of Facebook. And so I sent him messages. So it was not even an interview like this, no audio. It was just a transcript interview where I sent about a dozen questions, and he got back to me within a few days. And then we posted that. We did a few of those. We also did 1 or 2 podcast interviews where I had him on for that same outlet. And then he agreed to start writing blog entries for us. And so he wasn't even in
Oh.
Japan at that time. Yeah. So he was in AA, and then ahead of his AAA season, he was invited to the Arizona Diamondbacks spring camp. So that was his first time as a minor leaguer that he was essentially rubbing shoulders with major leaguers. So like Randy Johnson, star left-handed pitcher who was by that point near the end of his career. But it wasn't until 2010, late 2009, early 2010 that his Japanese experience started. And the first outreach was in spring of 2008. So I knew him for a couple of years even before he got to Japan. But he continued blogging for us during that Japanese experience. And he even blogged within a few days, I think within 4 or 5 days, maybe 2 or 3 of the earthquake and tsunami hitting. So that was
Wow.
really cool and special. It's such a sad, poignant thing, but
Yeah.
to have a first person account from a fellow American or a gaijin over there when everyone over here and around the world was really worried about Japan, that was really special. And I'll just fast forward because this is a really long answer that I'm giving, but 2016, and this also gets to the point of who's worthy of a biography. I thought his story was so fascinating, just given what he experienced in Japan all those years and just how it made him so much better as a person and pitcher on the field. But
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be marketable in North America. I didn't think I would get a book deal if he didn't ultimately achieve that lifelong dream of getting that major league contract at 32 years old. So that
Yeah.
was in late 2015. So I didn't even start working on it as a book until 2016. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about this. He was like, initial reaction was, me? You want to write a book about me? So I think it was a combination of things. It was humility, imposter syndrome, which I think everyone has no matter how successful you are. But also he knew that he wasn't the first person to go to Japan and back. He knew that his story wasn't necessarily that exceptional. So he thought, it's kind of weird that you want to write a book about me. And but I told him I didn't have to convince him much. I told him that it's really inspiring what he's done. It's a non-traditional route. And what became more newsworthy after the fact is now there are more and more people in MLB who went to NPB without any major league experience.
You said a couple of interesting things that are actually really bleed well into both of the other things that we wanted to talk about. But because you started to talk a little bit about the research that you did, I really want to transition to talking about that. And really, we really thought about, again, the biography piece. Some of this was introducing a foreign concept, not just with baseball, and all of the different statistics and nuances that go into the game of baseball, but also then the NPB and living in Japan and making that transition back and forth. And it's really like thinking about how you introduce readers to foreign concepts and the research that goes into that. And I think it was really apparent. And later on, we'll draw comparisons or recommendations to other books if you liked this book. that we try to give our readers. And I just think for me, this was one of the, throughout, it was just so well researched. Again, I'll go back to, for me at least, introducing a foreign concept, it's making it relatable through people. And I know I've already said this, but really, like you said, talking about the interpreters, talking about the bullet train, introducing these foreign concepts that really aren't as foreign, you know? So there are definitely some foreign things that we haven't seen, but then there's also things that you can relate to, and that's a way to kind of get in. I think also just how apparent it was with behind the research behind this. And I'll pause there to see if Isaac and Phil had anything they wanted to add before, Aaron, you're able to share a little bit more about your research journey.
Yeah, I think Phoebe, you nailed it. I think on and off, we have talked about this in other books as well. Any subject that you're unfamiliar with or that is a little bit different from things you're used to reading, especially if there are ways that you can still find related. So for me, the bike ride that him and his wife were doing at night, the bike ride, like
That
me
might
and
be
my
my
wife
favorite
ride
part
our
of the
bikes
book.
around at night.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And that seemed really cool. So like we were getting this, feel of what's already this insane idea of moving to Japan. You're these two white people in Asia. You're playing Japanese baseball. So it's still baseball, but it's like kind of a little bit different. But then you're just doing this normal thing and riding your bike around and exploring and doing the things that I would definitely be doing that as well. So I thought that was cool and had me like, I guess just more, a foreign concept is more easily consumed if you can relate to it. So then I had to like buy in to this character, not character, he's real, but like to the person the story is about. And then you can get into the story more, and then you're consuming that new concept better, I think.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I say character sometimes too, and then I have to correct subject or whatever we want to call it.
I just thought it was really cool that, especially like as a baseball reader, I was interested to see how Phoebe and Isaac would take this one. But I know nothing about Japanese culture, and I thought it was interesting how you did it, because I think there's a couple of ways you can write biographies. You can go chronologically, which you did not. And I think if you would have went chronologically, all the Japan stuff would have hit at the same time, and like I think any reader would have been lost. And I thought it was really cool how like Tony was having this time in Japan, and then you were like, this is the time that he struggled back at ASU, was really similar to this, where we've already been introduced to these characters, but you had made the foreign concepts a little bit more approachable by splicing and dicing them. So I thought that was really well done.
This is really nice to hear this nuanced perspective and also be able to share what I was thinking when I was doing it. And at first I was for a second confused when you said, Phil, that it's not chronological, because it kind of is, but there are just so many like flashbacks and so there's David Watkins. He's a super fan for the team. How and why did he get to Japan? And then we're going,
or as you said, the Guile
from
the
the
Canadian
UK.
outfielder.
Exactly.
Did
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah. So, and I was doing that very intentionally because I just thought the reader wouldn't really care that much about new characters, or could get overwhelmed easily if we didn't know more about their motivation. Did I say character? Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. We're talking about real people. We're all aware.
It's okay. We all know it's nonfiction.
Yes.
But yeah, so I just thought you wouldn't care about this player or this fan as much, or it could just be a little bit overwhelming if I threw a lot into the fire at once. And also, I didn't want to be bored writing it and reading it back. And so I just thought if it was just one through line from beginning to end, it just would get a little bit dry. This happened and this happened. Whereas I just wanted it to make more sense with the context that was needed. Like I said, with regard to how and why someone got to Japan, or why someone became an interpreter, or developing for the reader Hillary's background with baseball players, where her dad was in the minor leagues, and that she had liked traveling internationally before going to Japan, whereas Tony had no prior international experience, really. So yeah, I thought all of that was really cool to do, and I'm glad that you felt that it worked, because that's what I was hoping for. Also, David Watkins, I just wanted to mention David Watkins for a second again. So he's the British super fan who was one of the founders of TokyoSwallows.com, and he was so helpful throughout the process. When I traveled, the only time I went to Tokyo, this was in spring of 2018. So this was while I was researching and reporting and writing the book. He hosted my friend and me at a couple of baseball games at Jingu Stadium. He also took us around Tokyo, Shibuya, more specifically, to get okonomiyaki, which are really good pancakes, stuffed pancakes. He showed us around, and it was really cool. But even in the years before that, he was just navigating the 16-hour time difference, as was I, but to find time to talk with me. And so he's obviously an English speaker, but he has a toe in both worlds. And he's lived in Japan since, I believe, 2001. And his wife is Japanese and daughters are biracial. And he didn't even know baseball or wasn't a fan until he moved to Tokyo. And so I just thought it was really cool and interesting to hear his perspective on things. But also, he really helped me with the researching aspect. Their website, TokyoSwallows.com, it's now defunct, so it's harder to find that information. You have to go to the Wayback Machine. But his website had recaps of every single game in depth. So when I'm describing where a ball was hit or something, or and reactions by the fans and stuff, I got that from the recaps, and then I tried to corroborate it wherever I could. But his recaps were really good, and then he was also able to help me find other really good resources for statistics and things that were either in English or there were websites that were in Japanese, but they were largely statistical. So if I could just figure out what a category was, I could use the stats, and it didn't have to be in English. So a lot of the resources that I ended up using, I either got from him or other Japanese baseball reporters whom I spoke with throughout the process. So I would have been completely lost as an American who didn't really know anything about Japanese baseball before starting this process if it weren't for people like that. And so it was really important for me for those people to be highlighted in the book as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Isaac, I feel like you should talk about we talk about this a lot of the passion of people. Maybe you should just like bring this up to Aaron, because this is like really jogging my thoughts here.
We there's been a couple books it was in the Van Gogh book, actually. He talks about Van Gogh is like writing something and he's looking for it, like what it is. And we were talking like what is our personal it's. And for me, it's like when you like being around people that are just like so passionate about something, like just makes me passionate. Not even just about like that thing necessarily, but I'm just like, I get fired up about my own stuff because they're fired up about other things. So these guys are like, these guys are foreigners and then just diving like full into this Japanese baseball team is just like really cool.
Yeah, I loved that anecdote. I also liked how you made the comparison again to make it relatable, the Clippers to the Lakers. And that the Swallows were like the Clippers of, Tokyo. Yeah. It was Tokyo. Yeah. And so
I thought the Yomiuri Giants.
The best one I thought was the Tigers to the Cubs. That was super helpful.
That's a little specific to a baseball fan, but
well, because that's like such a hard, like, they're established, but they suck. Like, they're established, but they haven't won in forever. Like, it's a really weird vibe. And the Cubs, like, that's exactly it.
Yeah, and both the Cubs and the Hanshin Tigers eventually got their championship.
Yeah. It's true.
Well, speaking of LA teams, and we were talking about this a little before with you, Aaron. It's so awesome that we're getting to talk to you about your book while the World Series is going on. And I think that really culminates our third question and topic we wanted to discuss with you, which is something I think you'll be able to really shed some light on. And just thinking about, and Isaac mentioned this a little earlier, but thinking about how good you have to be a professional sports player, and more specifically, obviously in this case, a professional baseball player. And Isaac's comment was, just his unwavering, almost blind belief in himself, and seeing that through his whole journey. And I'll just pause because I really have no thoughts on that other than obviously you have to be good.
I just brought this up because, like, as I'm reading it, I'm just like, to me, there's nothing that, and I said this before, nothing that gave, if I was Tony, would have given me the, like, yes, I'm definitely becoming a major league pitcher. And he just, like, never gave up on it. And it, like, as I'm reading this, I'm like, so how hard is this actually to do? Like,
Yeah.
like, if I just commit myself to doing this and get the coaches, and do the time, maybe move to Japan for a couple years, like, could anybody pull this off? And I don't know if it's like if you're either like skilled or you're a hard worker, and I'm sure it has to be actually the combination of both. But as I was reading this, I'm just like, I feel like if someone who is an okay baseball player and they just really want this and are okay with that lifestyle, they could make it. Like, I didn't even know the MLB had over 30 rounds in the draft. Like, his friend had been drafted in the 30th round. Like, there are so many baseball players then.
They used to have way more.
So that was the
Oh, wow.
That was my only thought. And I know that sounds ridiculous. Obviously, I cannot become a professional pitcher. But if you have a kid who's like, I love baseball, and you're like, all right, like, little Timmy, just keep throwing. Be okay with moving around the world, and you can make it.
I think one of the things that stood out to me, and this is maybe one thing that I had a little insight into, and I think maybe it was left out of the book, Aaron, but I think that it might have been for a good reason, was there was a split year after his first year in Japan that he got really lucky that the other foreign player got hurt. And that was like, that was all in the book. And really, though, what wasn't in the book is that decision was not inconsequential. Playing for a farm team, like, he would have made minimum wage. Like, you're making $25,000 a year. It is ridiculous versus the $400,000 or whatever money he was being offered in Japan was way more. So if he wouldn't have caught that lucky break, I do think that, like, in once you're in that system, once you're out of the single A, double A, triple A, it is so hard. And so I do think the Japanese break was really his, like, that. Yeah, I don't know if anybody could do it. I think he caught a couple lucky breaks where the people in Japan were willing to bet on him.
Just to respond to what you said, Phil, about that lucky break, that's a really important point. And I don't know that it was missing from the book. I think it was maybe just like more glossed over. But there's a quote that he has, or maybe it's a quote and also a little bit of context provided by me, that says that basically there was no interest stateside. So after his really bad rookie season in Japan, none of the major league organizations wanted him. So it wouldn't have been that he would have gone to the minor leagues, single A, double A, triple A. It would have been independent ball. Or he would have had to,
the farm. Not farm.
Yeah. So, or as he said, he would have had to get a real job, and something that he had never really done in his life, and his whole identity was wrapped up into being a major league baseball player. So that was really scary of him. That was a really important tipping point, where, and you're right to highlight it. After that first year, it really seemed like it was going to be a 1-year failed experiment.
Right.
And that he would have had to go to independent ball. And as you were saying, Phil, it's really hard, even if you're dominating the competition, to then get the attention and interest of a major league organization, because you failed and you weren't that great in the minors. He was okay, but nothing extraordinary in AAA. Then he went to Japan, which is a notch below. It's considered quadruple A, so it's really hard to convince a major league organization a year or so after you left the Diamondbacks organization when you were on the cusp of making the major leagues, that you deserve a spot there. So yeah, just a really fluky sequence of events where the fourth and final foreigner spot went to a Korean pitcher who failed his physical. And that was the only reason why they brought Tony back with
Right.
for a second chance. And then they sliced his salary in half. And because he was so desperate, he was perfectly fine with that. And
maybe that was the point that I thought was missing. Like, a sliced in half Japanese salary is probably like 10 times what he could have made at an independent league.
Oh,
that is true. That is
right.
true.
And
Yeah.
I think
So he was
maybe
making 500,000, and oh no, he's making 250,000. But compared to a minor leaguer, that's like 10 times or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. I even though I didn't catch that nuance of the money aspect, I definitely was able to identify that as a huge, like, not only that the failed physical was his way back, and that really he was thinking this is kind of over,
Yeah.
Interesting point, Phil. Aaron, I think you wanted to also talk about the trials and tribulations of becoming a professional baseball player.
Oh yeah. So thanks for reminding me. So what Isaac was saying, as I just alluded to, so they call it quadruple A, and I really don't want a takeaway from the book to be that Japanese baseball is not that hard to succeed in. It's a really high level of play. First, there aren't that many spots because there are only 4 Gaijin spots. It's hard to be able to earn one of those. And there are only 12 NPB teams. So that's about 48 foreigners who are in Japan at the top level in any one year, or at least starting out the year. And so there aren't that many spots. But then also, as we said before, just getting drafted, it's hard enough as it is to get drafted, but then to really be valued by your organization is so important. These players that I mentioned before get these multi-million-dollar bonuses. They're given a lot more leeway and grace if they struggle at first, because the organization hasn't invested so much money in them and wasted or used a high draft pick on them. They're going to do everything in their power as an organization to help that player succeed. Whereas Tony was a 10th round draft pick. So, and he was already 22 when he got drafted, as opposed to 17, 18, 19. And so the odds were, I would say, against him. I don't think it's being hyperbolic, because tens of thousands of people get drafted, but only a finite amount of those, a small percentage, end up making it to the major leagues. And then, as I think Phil said also, and then just because you make your major league debut doesn't mean that you're able to prove that you're worthy of, you have staying power. And Tony proved that. He didn't just pitch 6 years in Japan and then get a deal with the Rangers and pitch a couple times, and that was it. He pitched for 4 seasons in the major leagues, arguably could have pitched more if certain things worked out differently, but he proved that he could pitch at the highest level and do it well.
Yeah. It's so inspiring, actually.
It definitely is really inspiring, and it just makes you think, like, what am I like not doing, because I just think it's so out of reach that
it's a little crazy too, I think. Inspiring, but also a little crazy.
Oh yeah, that's what I think. Like, when he was like, do I move to Japan or just like work? I would be like, I'm gonna get a job. I'm not gonna go play for some baseball team for $10,000 just to keep playing baseball.
Well, so we like to do then, Aaron, as I mentioned, if you liked this book, so if you liked Baseball Gaijin by Aaron Fischman, you would like, and then we fill in the blank. So I'll go first. As I've very much nailed out by this point, I am not a huge baseball. I don't follow. I love football. I love the Steelers. Shout out to the Steelers. But other than that, I don't really follow sports very much. And I also don't read a lot of nonfiction. But I will say, I've talked about this book on the podcast before, so Phil and Isaac have heard it, but it's worth mentioning, and I can draw the comparison a little bit. And I don't know if you've heard of this book, Aaron, but it's Empire of Pain. It's by Patrick Radden Keefe. the reason I'm drawing this comparison, completely different topics. This is about the Slackler brothers and the opioid epidemic. But what stood out to me about this book and your book is how well researched it was, and how many people both of you and Patrick talked to get a really full picture about what was going on. And I thought it was approachable. Both topics are foreign to me, but just so well researched, in my opinion. But that would be my recommendation to our listeners. I'll pass it over to you, Phil.
Do you want me to, can I react to that really fast?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's really great to be said in the same sentence as him. I know of him. I think he's a really good journalist. I have not read that particular book. I want to, but that's really cool. He's done a lot of good stuff, and yeah, so it makes me happy to hear.
Great. Yeah.
So mine, I will say Isaac just took the obvious ones. So
I'll only say one, Phil. You can say that. I'm only saying the first
I
one.
think you should say all three. I just, but mine is actually Game of Edges by Bruce Schoenfeld, which is a book about sort of how analytics have been used in sports, not just to win games, but also to make money. So, yeah, just I think well-researched book about sports, nonfiction, not a biography, but I think you would probably like it if you liked this one. So,
and mine was Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. It is one of my favorite books, I think, in my top 5 for sure. Unfortunately, I feel like they botched the movie, but I just thought like just both another like really inspiring story about the Washington rowing team, and yeah, like comparatively, like both inspiring stories, kind of a sports theme, but a sport. Rowing is not a sport I do anything about.
Yeah.
Before this book, so kind of
that's another one I need to read.
Oh, so good. Yeah. Yeah. Aaron, over to you.
One I want to add too. This one, not a lot of people have heard of, but it was kind of an early inspiration for the book. It's called Pacific Rim's Beer Men Ballin' in Flip-Flops and the Philippines' Unlikely Love Affair with Basketball. Well, that's a really long title. Really good book by Rafe Bartholomew. And I think it came out a while ago. Definitely well over a decade ago. But it is done in a way that I tried to replicate in a sense, where there's just so much non-basketball stuff, where the author Rafe Bartholomew talks a lot about government corruption, gender identity, sexual orientation, ads, capitalism. He tackles a lot of really fascinating topics, both in a macro sense, but also just using a lot of anecdotal things that just different basketball players are going through. And it's, again, like he gets you into this world that you would know zero about as an American reading about basketball in the Philippines. So that's one that I'd want to recommend.
Yeah. So when I wanted to close too, and obviously thank you. I think I'll just say kind of as an impromptu, I don't know that we could have had a better first author on the podcast. You put me at ease. I think it's a bit nerve-wracking to interview someone, and we haven't done that. So yeah, I can't think of a better author to have on as our first guest. Really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. I would say that we mentioned it earlier, and I think you have it about writing and about this topic and about sports from other conversations that you and I have had. So yeah, I just thank you so much for being on. Really enjoyed talking with you, Aaron. And I wanted to just ask too, if what's next for you, if you're open to sharing with us, where can people find out more about your writing? And yeah, just curious to share that with our listeners.
My absolute pleasure. It's been so great being on here with you three. And it's obvious you're paying close attention when you're reading or listening, and that you have a lot of really valuable and interesting thoughts. to share with the listeners and prospective readers, hopefully, and me. So I thought it was a really cool, fun, educational, interesting back and forth. But I don't really know exactly what's next, to be honest. I do want to write another book, and I want to be able to implement a lot of, or learn from and show that I've learned from a lot of the mistakes that I made during this process. Just I won't go into specific detail, but there are so many things when you're doing something for the first time. You realize you could have done it way better, way more efficiently, or you wish you could go back and do something differently because it would have made your job or life so much easier. And I really hope I get the opportunity to write another book. And I won't say more about it because it's in the really early stages and I don't know how feasible it is, but I do want to write a book focusing on identical twins in professional basketball. There are a lot now in the NBA, and including retired NBA players, WNBA players, and as one myself, I think I have a unique perspective on it. But that's something I'd want to do eventually. I'm not really sure in the near future what I'm doing, but I do also, I have the NBA podcast that was on hiatus for a while. We did a book interview in the fall, and that was our first show in about a year. I was just busy with stuff with this book, but we generally have NBA beat reporters on, and we ask them about the team that they cover. But I've been branching out, doing more similar to what you guys do, reading a book, and if I really enjoy it, having the author on. I did that with Brad Baluchian, who has written a couple books. His latest one was on professional wrestling, something that I really like you, Phebe, with baseball, know very little about and also care very little about. But he made me want to care, and so I enjoyed that experience. So not really sure what's next. That's the challenge with a book like this is I'm really proud of the product and the journey, and I think it's just so cool that it's out in the world, but getting people to care is really tough, especially if it's about a guy with not a lot of name recognition, which is closely related to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, or getting it in physical bookstores, and so just trying to spread the word, and that'll help give me a better chance of writing a second book or getting a second book deal. So yeah, that's it.
Get out there and read Baseball Gaijin. That's what we have to say.
Thank you.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, no, and we always close, Aaron, by reminding our listeners to call somebody that they love and tell them about a good book they've read. So in this case, definitely it should be Baseball Gaijin by Aaron Fischman. Thank you again for being on the podcast. And we recommend that if you have a sibling, that's the person that you call. If you don't, call somebody that you love. Otherwise, second pagers, go to your local library, pick up a good book. And until we talk again, stay classy. We'll see you later.
See ya. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you.